Before we get started, as always, a reminder, we have resources available, the recordings of our previous meetings and the ongoing agenda with all the resources and presentations that we've previously done in these meetings available on the Whole Child Supports website. So save that, bookmark it. Let me know if there's anything else that you need there. And I also want to point out that we've added to this website under the English Learners tab because there's some intersection between our students experiencing homelessness and English learners. So there's resources there specific to families who are English learners. If you want to take a look at that, all of the other resources that apply to all students they still apply to English learners, but these are additional resources that are specific to these students. So take a look, let me know if you have any questions. And I think most of us know each other, but if you want to introduce yourself in the chat, or if you've come across any resources lately that have been particularly helpful as you're working with students and families experiencing homelessness, please share them in the chat. Or if a need has come up since we've met last time and you're looking for a resource, please share it there as well, because someone in the group might have something that they use for the same issue. So with that, let's see. Suzanne from Job and Family Services, specifically the Division of Children's Services, is going to be presenting first. Thank you so much for being here, Suzanne. And I'm sharing your presentation from my screen, correct?
Yep. Sorry, I had to figure out how to unmute myself.
You're good. I will get that pulled up here. Just tell me when you want me to move forward.
Okay. Okay. So hi, everybody. My name is Suzanne Petrosini. I'm our intake program administrator for our Children's Services Department. So I oversee all of our investigations in our report line. I did put on there the phone number for our report line, and we're open 24/7 during the business day from 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. We're housed here, and then after that, so 4:30 to 8 a.m., it's just an on-call staff member. But calls can be made at any time. So I always throw that in any presentation that I do. You can go to the next slide. So for today's purposes, I'm going to talk about safety plans. So when we get assigned a case and go out there, if we determine that the child is in immediate danger of serious harm due to some sort of an active safety threat, we have to put in a safety plan. So we always have to be least restrictive and try a safety plan first. But so I just kind of threw in here what the Ohio Revised Code says about that. And it's a mutual agreement between us and the parents or the custodians, caregivers, upon a plan of action that's going to keep the kids safe. So when a safety plan is necessary, I have some examples up here. So a lot of the times we have safety plans in place for active substance use that's impacting a parent's parenting. We have to throw in there impacting parenting because substance use in and of itself isn't enough for us to intervene. We have to be able to show that it's impacting their parenting and their ability to provide for their kids. Generally speaking, if there's especially chronic substance use, then there typically is some sort of impact on parenting. Any excessive discipline that's inappropriate, leaving marks or injuries, that kind of stuff. Safety hazards in the home's not appropriate. We had a situation recently where there was a mold situation in the home that was causing a health risk to the children, so we had to take action there. Untreated or unstable mental health typically will lead to a safety plan for us, or if the parents just have a lack of protective capacities or parenting skills, it may result in a safety plan. Sometimes homelessness for us will result in a safety plan. Generally speaking, that we're trying to help the family and we're trying to help link them to community services, or sometimes we're even funding a place for them to stay. But if there is a chronic homelessness issue, and it's due to parents' behaviors. They're not, it could be prevented, but because of a lack of parenting capacity that's resulting in homelessness, sometimes we'll take action with the safety plan that way as well. So just some of the key points that I like to point out with safety plans is that they are our involvement in general, and safety plans are voluntary. So a family has to agree to work with us. They have to agree to let us in the door, and they have to agree to the safety plan. They have to sign off on it, essentially. I mean, it's a piece of paper that they sign and agree to all the different action steps that are on there. A safety plan is our least restrictive option. So generally speaking, we're not getting concerns and assessing and going straight to our legal department to remove children. We're trying the least restrictive option first, which would be a safety plan. Safety plans are temporary. The goal is to eliminate or reduce the risk and to not need a safety plan going forward. So the goal initially is always that they're temporary. And sometimes all the time, if we have a non-offending parent that's able to protect, we wouldn't necessarily have a safety plan, because our expectation would be that they are the parent and they should be protecting their children, and we shouldn't have to, force them to do that or have anybody sign anything. And that's also something that comes down from the state. So, mom's using drugs, but dad's, involved and he sees the kids and he has a relationship, then we would expect dad to protect the kids and not have to put a safety plan in place. So we have two different types of safety plans. There's an in-home safety plan and an out-of-home safety plan. So an in-home safety plan just means that the children remain in their own home, and a safe caregiver comes into the home to reduce the risk. So the caregiver, the expectation would be that they supervise 24/7 with the children. And that means, so like if you got a newborn baby, you have to, if that baby's getting up in the middle of the night, that caregiver is expected to get up as well with the parents in the middle of the night to make sure that the parents are being appropriate around the kids. With an in-home safety plan, the general expectation is that the parents are still doing the caretaking responsibilities, but that the safety plan caregiver is supervising all of the interactions to make sure that they're appropriate and then stepping in if they need to. With safety plan checks, we do a background check on the safety plan caregiver prior to them coming into the house to make sure that they're appropriate. They have to pass our criminal background checks and our SACWIS, which is our Children's Services background checks as well. And then our agency staff monitors the safety plan to make sure that it's continuing to reduce the risk. So we do that with weekly phone contact and weekly home visits. Weekly home visits. That says biweekly, but it's supposed to be weekly. I think I have them mixed up there. So generally speaking, though, when I talk to people about in-home safety plans, we have to remember that they have to reduce the risk. So if the concerns are that the home is deplorable and there's safety risks in the home, we're obviously not going to be able to use an in-home safety plan because that's not reducing any of the risk. In that scenario, we'd have to get the children, out of the home to be able to reduce the risk. So honestly, in-home safety plans are not used as often as out-of-home safety plans just because they're not able to reduce the risk. So an out-of-home safety plan, kind of just like it sounds, the children leave the home and they stay with an approved caregiver. So when that happens, they move into the caregiver's home temporarily, and the person at risk, so the parent custodian, they have supervised visits by the approved caretaker. And when we're putting children in other homes for safety plans, we have to check the home and do background checks for everybody that's living in the home. So adults and children residing in the home. So that's a little bit different than an in-home safety plan. And then agency staff monitors this as well to make sure that it's continuing to reduce the risk. So since it's out of home, the monitoring isn't as extensive as an in-home. So that's the bi-weekly home visits and the phone calls. So those two were mixed up a little bit. Head to the next slide. So safety plans and how it relates to housing and benefits and even McKinney-Vento, they are confidential. So whenever we have a safety plan, we generally try to get releases of information for any providers. Generally, we can talk with the school without a release of information. But if there's a safety plan, we would want to get that release of information anyways, just to make sure and just so that we can talk about everything openly and freely. Because obviously a safety plan is going to impact schooling in some fashion, because if they're outside of their school district, or if there's busing that's needed, that kind of stuff, we have to communicate with you guys. So we always tell our workers to get releases so that they can communicate with you guys openly about the safety plans. With the safety plan, parents maintain custody. So we try our best to explain the safety plan, and it's informational on the front of the safety plan, and then the back of the safety plan is all the action steps. And it's very thorough on the front, explaining that they still have custody, that they're still responsible for the children's basic needs, food, clothing, educational, medical, all of that. But sometimes parents will say things like, well, they took my kids. So if you're hearing that kind of stuff, you can ask questions like, well, is it a safety plan, or was custody changed? So you can really figure out exactly what's going on and what level we're at with things. It is the parents' responsibility to provide basic needs, but a lot of the times they either won't or can't when the kids aren't in the home. So the caregivers, the safety plan caregivers, are able to get food assistance, and it's based off of their income if they're caring for kids. And typically we would work with our human services to confirm that kids are where they say they are and that kind of stuff. And then if the safety plan caregiver is a blood relative, they can also receive cash assistance for the children in their home. So in regards to McKinney-Vento, whenever we have an out-of-home safety plan, that means that the child is not in their own home. So it falls under some of the definition of homelessness as far as your services with the families. We're still kind of talking about how we can work together the best as far as what we should do, because we don't have custody, the parents still have custody, but the child, their home life setting is disrupted and they're not in their own home. So we still want them to be able to get to school okay and all of those things. And that's sometimes where we would reach out to some of you guys to figure out like, hey, what can you do to help in the meantime, so that we're not disrupting this child's education while we're trying to get them in a safe place, in a safe situation. And that's really all that I have. Safety plans in and of themselves are relatively straightforward. Generally speaking, there's just a lot of questions because there's so many different scenarios. So if you have any questions now, feel free to ask. Or if you think of one in the future, like, oh, this is a weird scenario, I think I need to ask a couple questions about it, don't hesitate to give me a call and we can talk about it. Or you can talk to the worker or the supervisor assigned as well. Does anybody have any questions right now? Is there anything else, Christina, that you think would be helpful to share?
No, I think you covered it really well. Thank you. Yeah, we just wanted to discuss how safety plans and homelessness kind of overlap, because it's a different situation. We've had a couple of these come up very recently where students are placed out of the home in different districts. But again, safety plans are a temporary arrangement, and so it really falls under that that homelessness, as far as the student is unaccompanied at that point. They're not in the custody, or they're technically in the custody of their parents, but they are not living with their parents.
Yeah. And I suppose it could have been something like you described, where it was like an agreed upon place of living, I suppose, rather than homelessness. But we have a student who we did designate homeless early in the year, and unfortunately we're like at a crossroads on the education piece, because the person that she's living with does not want to, with good reason, have anything to do with her education piece, because we've had so many barriers and obstacles. And then the father of this student, who was incarcerated at the time she began here, is no longer incarcerated, but we're also at a standstill with communication with him. So now we're at this place where she is totally unaccompanied, but living with these friends, and has been for some time, but we're having trouble moving forward with the education piece because she's not cooperating, and you know what I mean? So we're not sure who to like communicate with, like on her behalf, to get things moving forward. Because as the way it looks, she's going to be living with these people for the duration.
Yeah, I feel like I'm probably going to need some more details to really understand the situation, and then maybe we can go to ODE specifically
Yeah, I
to get
didn't want
more
to take up too
guidance.
much of your time because it is a very long story, but
Yeah,
we have, called CPS whenever things got to the point where we weren't sure where she was even at. Or actually, she was living out of the district for some time, for about a month, but she continued online classes with us. So,
yeah,
um,
yeah. Email me or call me, and we'll talk more about the specific details because I don't want to share any information that
right.
we shouldn't. But I mean, we can tell from this conversation that this is coming up a lot. So that really helps to know that, Nicole, as you've been having these come up, that you're looking at them individually to see where they fall. That definitely helps. And just getting this conversation started with Suzanne, how we can work more collaboratively to make sure that these students, their education is disrupted as minimally as possible, since they are in a temporary living arrangement. So I really appreciate your time. If anyone has questions or thinks of any questions as we continue moving forward, just post them. And I know Suzanne has to hop off, but we will be in touch and I can get answers to those questions for you.
Thanks, everybody.
Sorry, I didn't hear you. I
I
apologize.
was just saying thank you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate your time.
All right, thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye. So next, in that presentation and her contact information are in our agenda. If you need to reference that in the future. Our second presenter is Josh Hinkle with Community Legal Aid, and he's going to be sharing more about what their organization does and how they can serve our families who are experiencing homelessness. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. You're going to share yours. Is that correct, Josh?
Yep, that's correct.
Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Happy to be here. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Josh Hinkle. I'm an attorney with Community Legal Aid. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we do, because what we found over the years is a lot of people don't exactly know much about us. So we are a nonprofit law firm that provides services to individuals who are at or below 200% of the federal poverty level who reside in our service area. So if you fall into one of these 8 counties, you're under our service area. So every county in the United States is covered by a legal aid organization. Here in Ohio, we have about 6 different ones. So if you're working with a family and they happen to move down to Tuscarawas County, they will fall under Southeastern Ohio Legal Aid Services. But we have fully staffed offices in Akron, Canton, Trumbull is in Warren, and then Mahoning offices in Youngstown. But we do have offices to meet by appointment in Worcester, Medina, Ravenna, and Columbiana. So I work out of our Canton office here in Stark County. And a big question I often get is, what is 200% of the federal poverty level? And so a lot of people hate it when I say it depends, but it is true. It depends on how many people are in the household. It doesn't matter if they're 1 month old or 100 years old, they count as a person in the household. So if a person has 3 kids and they're a family of 4, if they make $62,400 or less, they qualify for our services. And those seeking our services can apply online at communitylegalaid.org/apply or by calling our helpline. I normally advise people it's often better to apply online. And the reason is we cover an 8-county region. One of the largest complaints we get is I was sitting on hold for about 30-40 minutes. If you apply online, we will call you back within, I believe our goal is always within 40 hours or 2 business days.
Josh, your slides aren't moving on our screen.
They are not. Well, let me
Oh.
figure out how to get that going. Thank you for bringing that up, because that's a problem. All right. What about now?
It's loading. We're on the how individuals can apply slide.
Okay. Does it now say what is 200%?
Nope.
All right. Do you mind sharing the presentation then?
Sure, no problem.
That way we can click through. All right, so you can skip through. So again, there's the chart on the income. So as long as you have how many people are in their household, you can estimate, but you guys don't have to do the calculation on what their income is. We have a staff member that's trained to do that when they apply. So generally I tell people apply and we'll figure out if you qualify or not. So you can go on to the next one. So again, you can apply online or call our helpline, but like I said, it's often better to apply online so that the person's not waiting on hold. The other nice thing you can do is if you are working with a parent and the parent's sitting with you in the office, you can fill out the online application for them while you're sitting there in the office with them. Next slide. So these are our general areas of practice and projects. And so we're going to go through them all real quick to give you an idea of what each group does. The last one, Volunteer Legal Services Project, may be more useful to some of the populations you guys are working with. Next slide. So each project and practice group has its own case acceptance. We generally provide full representation or counsel and advice to the individuals we work with. Some common issues we get back is like, I can't get through. Again, that's oftentimes they're sitting on hold, they're giving up, they're trying again the next day and they're sitting on hold. Like I said, applying online is often the easiest way because again, you're not on hold, we call you back, and it gives us most of the information they're going to ask you over the phone so that conversation could be more targeted. I've often heard, like, I've applied 10 times and you guys didn't help me. Oftentimes they're calling for an issue that we don't handle. So if it's something we don't handle, of course, they're going to get rejected each time. And then a common complaint we've heard over the last couple of years is they sent me to a class. So we've started to utilize classes in person or virtually to try and address large groups of people who have the same issue. And that way we can be more effective and help more people. Next slide. So our first team is our consumer debt relief team. They provide legal defense in credit card and loan default cases. Oftentimes they're dealing with credit card companies like LVNB and middling creditors that purchase up debt and then begin collection efforts, garnishing wages, things like that that can make people's lives difficult to be able to afford housing, their car payment, things like that. So our consumer attorneys work to try and either work out plans to stop collection efforts, or as it says at the bottom, we do provide some assistance with bankruptcies. Sometimes for individuals, when they're drowning under debt, they need that restart. We generally say if they're sitting around $10,000 of debt and it's not looking like they're going to be able to get out of it, and there's not really a way for them to get out of it, it's usually a good idea to get a fresh start. But there are some issues that do come with that. Again, it's crashes your credit score. It's hard to get housing when they run a credit check. Next slide. So I work on our Assisting Reentering Citizens project. So the goal of this team is to help individuals who are involved with the criminal justice system address barriers to employment and housing. And so for most people, once they get a criminal record, their chances of getting a call back for a job decreases by over 50%. And then housing wise, I believe the last statistics I saw was about 75 to 80% of landlords are running background checks. And if they see a criminal record, they're denying the applicant. So this team, we primarily remove barriers through record sealing and expungement, certificates for qualification for employment, human trafficking expungement for those who are survivors of being trafficked, and then court debt relief. Because right now there's a bill pending to remove this ability from courts, but it's not a law yet. But if you owe court debt, a court can put a block on your license until you pay that debt. And it kind of starts a spiral because for most individuals, they need to be able to drive to get to their job. And so they drive, they get a criminal case for driving under suspension, which is more court debt and another court block. So sometimes we do work to try and help people relieve some of that debt, but it's normally tied to trying to clean up their records so they can get better employment and better housing. So we either do cases in-house, so I handle our in-house cases, but we also utilize a Goodyear clinic. So Goodyear Tire Company in Akron graciously lets us use their law department every couple months to do a virtual clinic where people get to meet with an attorney, they fill out the paperwork over Zoom, and then the paperwork gets mailed to them and they file on their own. So at the Goodyear clinic, they don't have an attorney going to court with them. If it's an in-house case, I usually go to court with them. Next slide. So our Legal Assistance to Victims Project is our project to help survivors of domestic violence. So we work to help people escape volatile relationships primarily through the use of protection orders from either the domestic relations court or family court. We do provide attorney representation, or we help people with assistance in filling out forms for pro se representation. And then if a divorce is necessary to remove the survivor from the relationship, we generally handle the divorce as well. Generally, we don't take on divorce cases. It has to be tied to domestic violence. We do have a divorce clinic, and I'll get to that in a little bit. Next slide. So I also work on our tenant assistance project. And so this is a project to help tenants in our region with multiple issues they may face with their landlord. So this can look like evictions, conditions issues, lockouts, and utility shutoffs. Work to avoid terminations from public housing, because if you get terminated from public housing, it can come with a 3 to 5 year ban, depending on the reason. And then Violence Against Women Act transfers in subsidized housing. It is important to note there is some confusion. The VAWA transfer is only available to subsidized housing. If they are in private housing with a private landlord, unless there's a Section 8 voucher that provides some subsidized money there, VAWA does not apply to private landlords. Each county's case acceptance is different based on staffing availability. I believe last time I checked, Stark County were fairly open with what's coming through. But again, next slide. We use different methods to help. So just a couple statistics on Stark County. So the Ohio Housing Finance Agency issued a report that found Stark County had the 5th highest eviction rate in the state of Ohio in 2022, with a rate of 5.36. The only counties with a higher eviction rate were Summit, Trumbull, Mahoning, and Cuyahoga. Next slide. Which again, when you look at our service area, Summit, Trumbull, and Mahoning are in our county region. So out of the 88 counties, our service area has 4 of the 5 highest eviction rates. So this is very important work, because stable and safe housing is important to the development of the next generation. The statewide eviction rate's about 4.3%. Next slide. Currently, what we're seeing is a lot of non-payment of rent cases. And a lot of that is tied to these other issues. So we've seen a huge increase in out-of-state corporate landlords coming to town. About 2 years ago, there was one company that became Stark County's largest landlord in a single day. They had bought up over, I think, 150,000 units in a single day, and then raised the rent. And that's a common issue we're seeing, is the affordability of rents in Stark County and really throughout the state of Ohio and the nation is getting difficult. And so it's causing non-payment of rent cases where people are entering into situations where they know they can't afford the rent, but they're going to try and see if they can keep up with it as long as they can, just to be able to secure some housing. Unfortunately, in a non-payment of rent, if it is a pure non-payment of rent case where they did not pay, say they did not pay May rent today, there's next to nothing we can do in an eviction unless there's a procedural defense. However, we just celebrated our 71st anniversary, I believe, this year. And so landlords, once they have a couple interactions with us, start to figure out how to procedurally do it. And so it's getting harder for us for those pure non-payment of rent cases. The other thing we're noticing is people moving into unsafe housing because it's affordable. So again, that's getting into our conditions work, where we try and either get a court order to force the landlord to fix up the property to bring it up to habitability standards, or escrow the rent. It is worth noting that sometimes when things are at a point where it's so unsafe, if the city becomes aware of it, it may get labeled uninhabitable and then they'll have to leave. I saw there's a question in the chat about, is there a cap on how much the landlord can increase the rent? There's not. So in 2021, there was a bill in the Ohio legislature to put a cap on it, and it got shot down real quick. So you could be running today at $500 a month and be told when your lease renews, it's going to be $5,000 a month. There's nothing stopping that. The only thing that can stop an increase is if you are under a term. So during the term of your lease, so if you're on a 6-month lease or a 12-month lease, you have locked in the price for that term. They can't increase it. So if you're at $500 a month for 6 months and you're only 3 months in, the landlord can't go, hey, the next 3 months are going to be $700 a month. Can't do it. But once that term ends, they can tell you, hey, month 7 is going to be $700 a month. The other thing that's very common is individuals will be on month-to-month leases, which personally, from my practice perspective, I really don't like. And the reason is the landlord and the tenant, the idea of it is they can renegotiate the terms every month. What that normally looks like is it gives the landlord the ability to increase the rent each month. And so for tenants, the whole power behind it for tenants is they can leave at any time by giving 30 days notice. In this housing market, tenants aren't going to leave good housing unless they have to because they can't afford it or for other reasons. But for landlords, there's incentives they can terminate you anytime by issuing a 30-day notice, and you'll need to get out by the end of the next month. Or, like I said, they can keep every month sending you a notice saying your rent's going up $100, $100. I see there's a hand raised. Is that a question?
Not really. I mean, a question / statement. I'm in Canton, local, Canton South.
Okay. Yeah.
Where there's like no housing available at all. And so I'm listening to you and, I'm reading your slides and everything, which are wonderful, but the thought keeps going through my mind that families don't have any recourse at all. It's all in, the power is all in the landlord's hands. I mean, I have moms that have evictions that are in their ex-husband's names from 7 years ago that can't get housing because they're associated with that eviction, and it wasn't even because of them, that because of the mom. That so it's like there's no end game, I guess. Is
if you are a renter, it is a rough situation right now. I will say I've gone to a couple national legal aid conferences, and things housing wise with tenants' rights are a little bit better in Ohio than some other states. So if you head a little south to our neighbor in West Virginia, the way their eviction process, you could be out within the week. It is a lot rougher down there, and I feel bad for my contemporaries down there trying to fight for tenants. But most of the remedies here in Ohio are not great for tenants when they're in bad situations. So again, if you're on a month-to-month, they can keep raising the costs. The other thing, there's no law prohibiting absorbent application fees. They can charge $100 per person to apply. There's nothing restricting that. There's not really any restriction on how much late fees can be. And so during the pandemic, we saw a huge increase in late fees, just being absolutely insanely high. Sometimes in court, we could argue the court that it was unreasonable and get the court to order it down, but oftentimes they wouldn't eliminate it entirely. The other thing that there's no block on is, like I said, with the different fees of them putting different fees for pets. The only thing that stops is an emotional support animal. They can't charge for that, but they can put insane pet fees. It is a very rough situation for tenants. It's hard out there, and it's only looking like it's going to get more expensive. The other thing we've started to see is a lot of landlords are now starting to sub-meter utilities, and then they're using sub-metering companies that it looks like their bills can sometimes be higher than what the whole complex's bill is because of all the different fees with sub-metering, because they're hiring this company to meter. Like I said, and Margaret, it's a tough situation. There's not really a great end game for tenants right now.
it's just terrible because there's kids involved.
Yeah.
I mean, it's terrible that there's human beings involved, but it's terrible that that kids have to be a part of that, and people don't see that. Anyway, I mean, I knew there was no answer to the question, but
to the point on evictions, the past couple of years there's been a bill to create eviction ceiling. So again, you can seal an unlimited number of felony fours from your record, but you can't seal an eviction. It's been proposed multiple times. From what we're hearing, it sounds like it's starting to make some decent progress. The past couple ones never left committee, so we're hopeful in the next couple years potentially to get eviction sealing, and that would be a huge help to many. Massillon doesn't do eviction sealing, and neither does Alliance. However, Canton Municipal Court is open to it in limited situations. Usually there can't be any money owed to the landlord. It's got to be at least a year or two old, and they can't have been evicted in that kind of time period. But again, in those situations, if you're at Canton and the eviction's in the Canton Municipal Court, you can send them to us and we can talk through and see what's best for them.
And that legislation is state or federal?
State. So evictions are a state statute, and so it'd be in the Ohio State Legislature. If you're passionate about that issue, highly recommend calling your local congressman. I cannot, due to our federal restrictions, I cannot advocate for whether or not a law is a good idea or not, but I can always suggest others, if you're passionate about it, to make that phone call. Next slide. The other thing too, again, getting back to our conversation on the rent increases, Ohio in 2022 put together a report to show how bad the housing situation is. So over a 1 year period, rents on average increased 12.6%, and over a 2 year period increased 21.4%. Again, this report's about 2 years old. I'd be interested to see what the new data shows. They also took the top 10 occupations with the most employees in Ohio, reviewed those occupations' wages and rents, and only 2 out of the top 10 occupations in the state of Ohio can afford a 2-bedroom apartment. Again, that was 2 years ago, before we started dealing with inflation and other cost of living increases. Next slide. So again, getting back to utilizing a class, we host a tenant class every week on evictions, and then we try and do one every couple weeks on conditions issues. Both are available on our website at communitylegalaid.org/eviction. Just click attend free online eviction clinic on Tuesday at 4 o'clock, and it'll take you to our Zoom link that you'll click. There will be one of us attorneys that will do a presentation on the eviction process, some possible defenses, and then be able to answer questions tenants may have that are facing eviction. We always recommend individuals like yourselves who are dealing with populations that are facing eviction to attend, just so that you can become more kind of familiar with the process. Because if they start bringing some terminology from their court paperwork, if you're not aware exactly what that means, they may not know that they're in trouble, but if you know it, you can tell them, make sure to contact Community Legal Aid. Next slide. Our foreclosure team, we currently offer a foreclosure class. The class offers information on the process and options to take, because sometimes knowing what to ask for can help save your home. So knowing to ask for a loan modification can sometimes save an individual's home from going through the foreclosure process. But if you don't know that's something to ask for, you don't know it, and you're not going to make the ask, and then it may be too late. Next slide. We have an immigration team that accepts applications for assistance with naturalization, works to remove conditions for permanent residents. They help non-citizen relatives enroll in school. Right now, our immigration team, their intake is limited, that there was a giant surge of refugees in Akron Public Schools last fall. I believe about 80 refugee students came through, and so our immigration attorneys are drowning in getting those kids enrolled properly in the school and getting them all set up. Next slide. We have a parenting grant. This allows us to assist non-custodial parents with visitation orders and modifications. And the main requirement is the child must live in either Stark, Trumbull, or Columbiana County. We have not been able to get this grant to expand to service-wide, but if the kid lives in Stark, Trumbull, or Columbiana County, the parent can live in other counties. So if they live in Tuscarawas County, Medina County, Summit County, that's fine. The kid just needs to live in one of those 3 counties. And we generally help with paperwork, or in Stark County, we do have funding to provide representation to some non-custodial parents to get court-ordered visitation or modify prior orders. What we found is it's very common for courts to issue an order that say visitation is at the discretion of the custodian parent. Well, if the non-custodian and the custodian are starting to argue, all of a sudden the discretion is utilized as you're not seeing the kid. And there's plenty of data out there that shows that kids are often better when both parents are involved. So if you are dealing with any parents that are non-custodians that are wanting to see their kids, and the kid lives here in Stark County or they're in Trumbull or Columbiana County, just make sure to send them our way. Next slide. We have a public benefits team. They don't assist with applying for public benefits, but they provide assistance with denials, terminations, overpayments, reductions, and sanctions for Medicaid, Ohio Works First, food stamps, and unemployment. They also assist with some Social Security and Social Security disability income cases related to terminations or pauses to try and get those fixed, because if that is their only income and it stops, it can put them in a situation where they're now facing an eviction and have to relocate. And if there's kids involved, it can be very challenging. There are situations where a minor can qualify for like Social Security income or Social Security disability income. Again, if the kid is the recipient of the funds, we can still work on those cases. Next slide. We have a tax team. They do not assist you in filing your taxes, unfortunately, but they do assist primarily with federal issues from prior years. So everyone dreads getting the letter that from the IRS months after tax season. If they're saying that there's an issue, make sure to call us. We may be able to assist with it. And then we can also assist with some state and municipal tax issues from prior years if it's tied to that federal issue. And then, unfortunately, we do a lot of work with the child tax credit and earned income tax credit issues, primarily when it comes to divorced parents and the parent who is not supposed to claim it claims the tax credit. We do a fair amount of work of making sure whoever was supposed to get the tax credit actually gets it. Next slide. So our volunteer legal services project. So everything prior to this is what we do in-house. Our volunteer legal services project are volunteer attorneys throughout our service area that will help us with different issues that we don't have the capacity to be able to take on. So we have volunteer attorneys that help with adoptions, bankruptcies, consumer issues, again, criminal record sealing through our Goodyear clinic. We have a divorce clinic. Again, that one fills up very quickly, and we're often scheduling it out months in advance. The big thing on that one is both parties have to agree to the divorce. If one party is going to contest it, the clinic's not a good fit for them. The divorce clinic is there that both parties agree this marriage needs to end. They show up, they fill out the paperwork with an attorney, they sign it, they go file it, and they'll be divorced within a couple weeks. We have volunteer attorneys that help with employment issues, estates and estate planning, some housing issues, land contract cases, and then name changes for minors and adults. Next slide. And then our last project is our neighborhood law project. I also work on this one here in Stark County. This team is to take on more systemic issues in our geographic region. And so right now the focus is on tenant organizing, primarily in subsidized properties, making sure that they are empowered to take on the issues that some of our subsidized properties have. Unfortunately, while tenants can complain about some issues, sometimes property management won't listen to them until you have about 50 tenants going, this is an issue. We provide assistance with setting up some nonprofits that assist our client population. So we've provided some assistance with setting up nonprofits to help the reentering population, people who are impoverished that need assistance with wraparound services, and then sober living nonprofits. We've helped set up a couple of those. We do some small business work with the Stark County Minority Business Owners Association. And then the big thing is we do office hours. Next slide. So the office hours I'll get to, I think there's a slide coming up. I'm realizing I'm so reliant on that slide preview to know what's coming up next. So our tenant organizing work addresses systemic issues in multi-unit apartment complexes. So primarily we've been working with Cherry Turner Towers, Alliance Towers, Navarro Village Mobile Home Park, Victory Square, Plaza Terrace, and Reynolds Manor to kind of help the tenants work together to address their issues. Right now, we're not looking to take on any more unions as these ones are kind of keeping our hands full right now. Next slide. So again, we help set up some nonprofits with those that are working with our client population. The goal of this is to try and address the needs that we're seeing that are going unmet and help people achieve their goals to assist these populations. The one thing that we started to discover is oftentimes we are a Band-Aid to a problem, and they have a broken arm and they've got a cut, and we're putting the Band-Aid on the cut. So if we can help individuals that are wanting to create nonprofits that can work on the broken arm, we are starting to help them get set up so that they can address that issue and we can address the issues that we're able to. Because again, as lawyers, there's only so much we can do, although people seem to believe we can do everything and anything. We are trying to see if we can help Stark County and really our general service area address some of the unmet needs that we're seeing. Because a lot of times, by the time people get to us, their back is against the wall and there's so many issues that even if we help them and address one issue, they may have 10 more that put them in a worse spot. Next slide. So again, we primarily work with Stark County's Minority Business Owners Association, primarily focusing on newer small business and entrepreneurs who may not have the capital to hire an attorney at the beginning of their business. So this looks like we've helped some people file the paperwork with the state or just do some minor contract review, just helping them kind of get set up. Next slide. So our office hours, we do office hours in 3 points here in Stark County. So we do weekly office hours every Tuesday from 9 to noon at the Family Matters Resource Center in Alliance. Weekly on Wednesdays from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock at Canton for All People. That address is the old address. They recently just opened up a store on Shorb, and so we've relocated our office hours to over on Shorb. And then we're at the Akron Canton Food Bank the first and third Wednesday of each month from 1 to 3. And these are counsel and advice clinics where individuals can drop in, talk with us, and we can give them advice on their situation. So if it's something we're able to handle, we'll oftentimes get them connected to where they can apply. But many of the issues we've been seeing, they don't necessarily need an attorney. They need to know where to go, or they need to know how to handle the issue. Next slide. And we've overall seen an increase in attendance at these clinics. So compared to last year, so when we looked at Q1's data, we're 36% of last year's overall attendance. And same with Canton for All People, we're at 34% of last year's total attendance, and Akron Canton Food Bank's at about 39% of last year's total attendance in Q1. Next slide. And what we've seen is an increase in issues primarily with family and criminal records. And those seem to be kind of oftentimes connected, that families are separating, people are starting to struggle financially, and it's leading to decisions that oftentimes put them in a worse position. And then again, Canton for All People, we've seen an increase in just general information. So this is why I'm thankful you guys have allowed me to come here and spend part of my afternoon with you guys, is getting this information into your hands, because I know it'll get passed on to people who will need it. Next slide. We are looking to expand our office hours into Massillon after having about 2 years of success in Canton and Alliance. We're also looking to target neighborhoods with conditions issues. So if you have ideas for neighborhoods with housing conditions issues, please let us know. We're still trying to narrow down where we're thinking on just focusing on a single neighborhood to try and address as many conditions issues as we can. Next slide. All right, so I'm going to be taking questions. So can drop the presentation and feel free to unmute. I do see there's one from Chrissy. In a domestic violence couple and the husband's incarcerated for charges unrelated to DV, is there a way to get the husband to sign an affidavit so the wife can get licenses for the vehicles? So generally she can get him to sign a power of attorney, and that'll allow her to do it. She will need to get it notarized, which oftentimes is difficult when they're incarcerated.
So they do have paperwork from the DMV that you can get them to sign, but if you have to have it notarized, what do you do? I mean, like, it's not like the jail does it. And how do you get that paper signed if he's in jail?
So is he in SRCCC or is he, where's he at?
He's in Stark County.
Sometimes you can call the jail and see if you can set up like a visitation to be able to get the signature on the paperwork. Sometimes, I mean, it's always helpful to know someone that's a notary, because if you're able to get that set up, but a lot of times you'll have to wait till they're out of incarceration.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Well, thank you, Josh. That was a lot of great information, and you can see that Community Legal Aid is able to support the families you're working with at many different points in like housing insecurity, and the issues that often relate to housing insecurity. I wanted to like note a few things that we talked about with like court debt relief. I'm going to skip ahead in the agenda for 1 second. There's this week, actually, the Supreme Court was debating a case about if homelessness can be criminalized, and that looks like finding people who are homeless, who are unable to, who are like sleeping on the street or in their car, which would add to that debt and that court debt. So just keep your eye on that, because that's going to further complicate issues for your families, and it's like looking likely that they are going to decide in favor of criminalizing homelessness. So go ahead with your question whenever.
Wait a minute. They're going to criminalize homelessness for the individuals who are homeless.
Correct. Do you feel comfortable talking about this issue, Josh, or I don't want to put you on the spot?
Yeah, so it stems from a state doing criminalization. The Supreme Court necessarily, if they rule for the state, it's not going to automatically make homelessness criminalized, but it would allow states to criminalize homelessness. So if they decide it's not like instantly homelessness in Stark County is going to be criminalized, but it would pave the way for like the Ohio legislature, if they wanted to pass a law criminalizing homelessness. And with that Supreme Court authority, there would be no way to challenge it except for having a new legislative body change the law. That would be it.
What is the advantage of doing that?
They're thinking of it. It's my understanding that it's thinking of it like a deterrent to avoid people coming to a city. In the city that this is taking place in Grants Pass, they have no shelters.
Okay.
And so it's like the idea is to deter people from coming to their town. But honestly, it's not a solution to the problem. Obviously, we can all see that that's adding to the problem, and not addressing the root issues that we've been talking about here. So I will also in our agenda, there's some articles about that, but then we've talked previously about legislation that's in committee in the Ohio legislature for taxing corporate ownership of housing. So like above, I think it's above 50 units, like Josh talked about, when someone became the biggest property owner in one day, taxing those corporations when they own a huge share. But that has stalled, so that, if you are interested in advocating as people who have experience and are boots on the ground working with these families and seeing how this issue is impacting communities and students, that you can call your legislator about that bill, and that's in our agenda. And then also there is a similar bill that's been proposed federally, and I have that linked in our agenda today. So take a look at that. I also threw in some research that recently came out of Canada about large cash payments for people experiencing chronic homelessness as a solution, and they were seeing long-term positive outcomes where people are able to secure housing. and maintain that housing over the long term with this solution. So take a look at that, because there are a lot of other solutions out there besides criminalizing this issue. So that is in there. Do you have anything else you want to add, Josh?
Nope.
I really appreciate your time and all the work you all are doing, and for being here with us today. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys.
And then I'm just going to go back in our agenda because I skipped forward a little bit here. So I added this section. I haven't done this before. You guys can tell me if it's helpful or not. But individually, like between learning communities, I hear from people in districts about very like unique circumstances related to McKinney-Vento. And so I decided I would share like a couple of question and answers that we've gotten from Ohio Department of Education about how McKinney-Vento is being interpreted in these specific situations in case they come up for you. So that way we don't lose that knowledge, and then we can all share in what we've learned. So we had a situation come up where a student was residing in a district but was enrolled in a alternative school. And so the question was, is the district of origin or district of residence where the student lived when they became homeless, are they still responsible for transportation, even though the student is enrolled in an alternative school? And the answer that we got from Ohio Department of Education was that if the district contracts with an alternative school or community school to enroll the student, then the district is still responsible. But if the family enrolls the student in the alternative or community school, then it's likely that now I forgot the acronym that I put in there, the FAPE rights would have been waived and the district is no longer responsible. So fair and appropriate education rights, public education rights are forfeit if the family enrolled them themselves. So that's good to know. We're always like learning new things about McKinney-Vento. This also recently came up as far as if you're not able to like get a bus or a van out to a family who's moved out of the district or is sheltering in another district because they're homeless, can you use Uber, Lyft, rideshare, etc. to provide that transportation? You can provide the funds for the family to arrange that transportation, but the district itself can only arrange transportation that's certified, which like many cab companies are, but rideshare companies are not. So if you're going to use an alternative, transportation like a rideshare app, then you can give the family the funds to do that, but you cannot arrange the transportation. Mallory, you had a question?
Yeah, that's interesting because I was just on a webinar last week and I was with people from across the United States, but I remember writing down a lady's name because she said she was from Akron.
Mm-hmm.
And unless they finagled it a different way, my understanding was they were using Lyft
Mm-hmm.
to help with that issue. And the caveat was if the kid was not over 18, the parent had to ride to the school.
That's a good
and
point.
Then they got a ride back home.
Yes. Well,
So I might email her just
information
to see, but that's interesting.
Yeah, that piece of information came from a webinar I was on with Ohio Department of Education and Workforce, that they said that they didn't explain that if the parent is in the rideshare, then that changes the circumstance, but that any transportation that the school is booking has to be certified.
Okay.
So
And maybe that's the difference with the parent there.
yes, and I'm not myself familiar enough with Lyft to say whether or not maybe they have certified choices, but just keep that in mind that was something that came up with ODEW. That third one also came up. So if a student becomes homeless while living in a district who's preschool aged, but hasn't yet enrolled in the preschool, who is the district of origin? Is it the district that they were living in when they became homeless, regardless of enrollment, or is it the district that they are sheltering in when they choose to enroll? And the answer that we got from Ohio Department of Education and Workforce is that it's the district they were residing in when they became homeless, regardless of if they were enrolled yet in preschool. And there were a lot of, I added in the other qualifications there to the answer, because obviously there's more considerations when we're talking about a child that young, how far of a commute, all of those things. But ultimately, it is the parent's decision, and the parent could choose for the student to be enrolled in the district of origin, even though they weren't yet enrolled, but they were eligible. Does that make sense? It's a very, it's a very confusing situation, but let me know if you all have questions. And if this is helpful, because this comes up a lot of like intricacies about how the law is interpreted. The situations aren't always very clear cut. So if this is helpful for me to be putting this information in here, I can keep doing that. Anyone have questions about those? No?
Hey, Christina,
Yes.
those are super helpful. Is there a way to where you can take like a keyword and put it up with a bookmark for
Ooh.
those, if you're going to do it each time, so that, you know, so I'll remember that's about preschool.
Okay.
And I actually cut and paste that because that a situation similar to that came up. But it'd be great to have some way for me to search by a topic.
Okay, yeah, that let me think about that. I might call you because you've got those organizational skills.
Okay.
But I will
No,
think
but
It sure does.
I really liked those a lot.
good.
Those were
I'm glad
great.
that was helpful.
My only other suggestion, I kind of wrote a note to it, is like with Mallory's question, maybe with the answer, put the source of the answer and the date of the answer, because you know how
Okay.
sometimes laws, information changes, and yeah. So
That's-
source and date might be helpful too, because this list will grow. I find it very helpful.
Great. And keywords. And then I think this could be useful too. I know sometimes you guys are like Nicole had this experience with safety plans and playing it by ear. So this could be more of a shared place where we keep information if you have situations come up like that. And it's super helpful for the group because I know sometimes it's hard to get answers back in the time that you need them for unique situations. So please feel free to share or add, or we can brainstorm about how it would be easiest to accumulate that information together. So I think that is most of what's on today's agenda. Besides, here are the dates for next year's learning communities, and I'm gonna send out those invitations after the meeting so that you have them on your calendar for next year. Does anyone have any feedback on if this is still a good time, or if mornings are better, or different days of the week? They're still flexible there. Obviously, we're looking at next year, so is everyone still good with this Wednesday afternoon time? Okay. And then there's the attendance link and evaluation survey. I'll get certificates of attendance out to you if you complete that. And then there's an additional question for this meeting about changes to your administration for next year. So if your homeless liaison position is changing, or if you're adding someone to your team that you want to be on the listserv, there will be questions there for you to add that as well. So does anyone have any questions, comments before we end the meeting? Okay. Well, thank you all for your time and for a great school year, and we'll see you in the fall. And I'm here if you need anything between now and then. Have a great day.